Hey everyone, welcome into a new episode of the Bengals Beat podcast. I'm your host, Kelsey Conway, here at the Enquirer studio with podcast producer Phil Didion, and we are here to break down the Bengals Week 1 loss to the New England Patriots and look forward to their upcoming matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs. And we're not going to spend much more time talking about the Week 1 game because we've talked about it a lot to this point, but just a very bizarre performance from Joe Burrow in Week 1 because there was so much anticipation that his first time being back on the field since mid-November, that he was going to come out and look like he was on that revenge tour that everybody feels like he is. And he didn't look like himself at all. He looked uncomfortable in the pocket. He looked scared at times to push the ball down the field. And when you look at his stat line, that's just not typically a stat line that you're used to seeing from Joe Burrow. So we will see where he's at today. He talks to the media. He told the media following the game, I would like to see the tape before he really commented on what happened. But a very weird performance and not a good enough performance from Joe Burrow. And that's what offensive coordinator Dan Pitcher and head coach Zach Taylor said. Not enough good from anybody. And the hope is that with Jamar Chase now able to take a full game's worth of reps with Burrow, that deep passing game will come back. But the Bengals have to have answers offensively. And it's not going to be able to be an excuse to just say, well, they took the deep ball away from us. And that really just made us not able to play in the attacking style that we will. They have had all off season to figure out new ways to feature these new weapons that they have. And when Joe Burrow tells everyone that this is the most talent he's had around him, there's no excuse to go out and score 10 points in your home opener against a team that you should beat. So we will see if this team and this offense can regroup, and if we learn more about what Cincinnati's offensive identity is going to be this year, because if you start 0-2 and there's another game where Cincinnati's offense can't really get rolling, the questions are just going to keep piling up, and the Bengals need to answer some of these questions, specifically Joe Burrow. He needs to show that his wrist is healthy. If Zach Taylor and Burrow and everyone is saying that he is healthy and good enough to go out there, they need to show that with some deep passes to Jamar Chase, Andre Yoshivas, Charlie Jones. Chase Brown needs to be a bigger part of this offense. The Bengals need to come out on Sunday ready to go and not fall behind from the Chiefs, because as Zach Taylor always says, when they get themselves into a hole, they can't run their offense the way they want to. So a fast start, I can't believe I'm saying this again in week 2, but a fast start is critical for this team, because an 0-2 start, again, is not a place that this team wants to be, but it's going to be a tough matchup against the Chiefs. So to talk more about this particular matchup, I want to bring on my friend. I've been on his show a number of times, and that is Mike Golic Jr., the co-host of the Gojo and Golic show on DraftKings Network. He is a college football analyst, and he's long time covered the NFL, so he's got a lot of perspective about the Kansas City Chiefs. So I wanted to bring him on and talk about this week's game.
Well, it was a tough weekend for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, and it was a tough weekend for the Cincinnati Bearcats, and it was a tough weekend for the Cincinnati Bengals. So my guest today, we're having a rough week after this past weekend. So if you don't know who I could potentially be talking to, you're going to know now, and that is Mike Golic Jr. joining me to talk about all that went wrong in our football world this weekend.
Yes, this is a podcast that's part morning, part therapy session. We're going to work through a lot of complex feelings here and hopefully come out on the other side better for it.
Well, so we were just talking before I started recording about just how bad of a loss that was for Notre Dame, but I didn't even ask you. Who do you think's loss was worse, Notre Dame's or the Cincinnati Bengals? Because the Bengals might have suffered the worst loss of the NFL slate this weekend, but obviously Notre Dame's was the worst loss in college football. So who do you think gave the team for their money there?
I know, pulling up .com on any given day and seeing your team be that negative headline, never a good feeling. And Notre Dame and Cincinnati certainly had that distinction this weekend, college and pro. I'll say Notre Dame's is worse, though, just because the talent disparity between the two levels. Northern Illinois is a strong program, and Coach Hammett certainly deserves a lot of credit for what he's done with those guys' veteran group. But in the NFL, you know this, the margins and the difference in talent are so slim. And you look at this New England team that, while they were coming into this year with the offensive line a question mark, Jacoby Brissett's been a career backup with starting experience that people trust. That defense still has all of the DNA from the Belichick era there. Gerard Mayo, obviously a disciple of that himself as a player and now as a coach. And walking into a season where Cincinnati's coming off a really tumultuous offseason and training camp with one of their star players going into this year with Joe coming off the injury. So I can make a lot more excuses that I'll understand for Cincinnati than I can for my alma mater that just laid an egg at home.
Well, usually after a Bengals loss, there's a lot of fans that are very positive. I will tell you that is the most negative I've seen the fan base be because of, yes, it was a lot going on in the offseason, as it always is with the Bengals in the last couple of years. But I think because of the roster disparity and the line on the game, like everybody when the schedule came out in May was like, the Bengals, this is finally the year that they get off to a faster start, because how would you lose to the New England Patriots in your home opener, especially when your quarterback got through healthy? So I wanted to talk a little bit about what we saw from the Bengals. And then I wanted to have you on this week because I wanted your national perspective of the big game coming up, and that is against the Kansas City Chiefs. So life doesn't get much easier for the Bengals. And, you know, I keep going back to this point. Everything with the Bengals has just been so bizarre in the last couple of years. Like the games that you think they have no chance in, they win. And then the games that you think that they're going to slam dunk win, they lose, or just things that you think are going to happen, they don't. I don't know how to feel about the Bengals going into week 2 because of how bad they looked in week 1. And I'm trying to not overreact. But what I saw on Sunday was so concerning because I came on your show and your dad specifically asked me about Cincinnati's defense. And I was like, yeah, I think they're going to be so much better. The communication, everything is going to be turned around. They were atrocious in tackling against the New England, specifically the rushing attack for New England. They couldn't stop the run again. And I don't know how that gets better. Yes, I anticipate them tackling better as the season goes on, but it's not like they have a group of defensive linemen that are going to get back from being on IR and just, you know, magically make things better for the Bengals, especially when they're going to go up against one of the best teams. So that was concerning to me. Yeah. So let's tackle that before we even get into Joe Burrow and the offense.
Yeah, I think that is the most concerning part. And I think there was a lot of belief that the Bengals, who, you know, struggled so much as a tackling unit last year, by solidifying that safety spot, bringing Von Bell back, signing Geno Stone, was kind of going to have a top-down effect on everybody else. And you're right, the Patriots being able to go right down State Street, Ramondre Stevenson having the kind of game that's going to make him a fantasy darling for so many people this season if they can keep that up. Really concerning, because that was your issue last year, and specifically concerning with this matchup because we know this is a Chiefs team that over the last year or so has recommitted itself to the ground game in a way that wasn't a hallmark for them before. This goes from the Patriots, who are an offensive line with so many questions, to a Chiefs team where, especially along the interior, it's considered one of the strengths of their team. And so I think that's certainly a concern to go along with. Now, if you've got that as the foundation, the Patriots weren't going to be able to dice you through the air the way now Kansas City, who especially last week, the way they attacked the middle of the field specifically, where you look at Cincinnati and their defense against routes coming over the middle of the field and in breakers last year, was a real struggle. So I think that's my biggest concern, is that foundation was there and the Patriots weren't equipped to do anything off that the way Kansas City is this week.
Yeah, so there's so many concerning things about what Cincinnati did on defense because, as you just mentioned, everyone knew they were going to run the ball. That was going to be their offense, and they couldn't stop it. And this is the same thing that was the case last year. And when you play in the AFC North against the Cleveland Browns and the Baltimore Ravens and the Pittsburgh Steelers, you have to be able to stop the run. And they just couldn't. And yes, they're going to get back some rookies. They're going to get back Chris Jenkins, their second-round pick out of Michigan, and they're going to get back McKinley Jackson. one of their later round picks out of Texas A&M. But you're asking a lot from two rookies who to think that they're going to come in and make a world of a difference. I just don't see it. But it's weird because it's players that have been in the system before that just aren't making tackles. So you wonder if it's the week 1 thing again, but if it happens again in week 2, then you really might have to have some questions about, is Cincinnati's defense good enough?
The interesting part for me is, though, and I can understand the fan base there feeling like it's, oh, here we go again. At the same time, it's, hey, I'm more concerned about, as long as Joe Burrow stays healthy, while the offense is the same brand of sort of like uninspiring and masters of the obvious and things that we've seen in the past, that's been good enough in the past because your quarterback's been good enough in the past. And the slow starts have been the hallmark. I mean, you know this as well as anyone, but if they lose this game, they'll be 1-9 in weeks 1 and 2 in Joe Burrow's time as a starter in Cincinnati. And yet this is still a team that, when he's been healthy under center, has been one of the few that can crack the Chiefs' code when it comes to the postseason. So I don't worry too much yet about this team, but seeing, Lou Anarumo used to be one of those guys. We just throw the name out there. It's Lou Anarumo's defense. It's going to be fine, but we've got to update the software now because until further notice, this is a group that's compromised up front in a way that doesn't have any personnel signs, to your point, of slowing that down anytime soon.
Well, and that's will lead us into our conversation about the offense. I'm less concerned about what I saw from the Bengals defense because in the NFL, if you give up 13 points, which is basically what Cincinnati's defense did because the special teams fumble contributed to three more points for New England, you should be able to win a game, especially when Joe Burrow is on the other side. You expect the Bengals to be able to score more than 13 points. So I'm less concerned about the Bengals defense. I hope that the tackling improves and we're not talking about them having double-digit missed tackles again this week against the Chiefs because they will not win if that is the case. But let's talk about the offense. So when I read you this stat line, what is your first initial thought? 21 of 29 passing yards for 164 yards and 0 touchdown, and only 6 of Burrow's attempts were for 10 or more air yards. What do you think of that?
Well, one, I think it's sort of indicative of a trend we've seen league-wide where offense and passing have been way down over the last few years now, and that's a testament to the defensive response to all of the big plays and to great quarterbacks like Joe, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, all these guys that were a part of this air revolution in the NFL that we had seen in the years prior to that. The pendulum swings back the other way eventually. These coordinators on defense are paid a lot of money to sit here and think about football all day long. And they decided, hey, we're not going to give up the big plays anymore. And so I think for Cincinnati, what that tells me is it's going to have to be a little bit more varied attack offensively. A bigger commitment to running the ball may have to show up at different junctures. We're seeing a lot of teams in the division. We saw Baltimore lean on that for so much of the regular season last year. And to finish this game with only 16 rushing attempts, even though they were averaging, Zach Moss close to 5 yards a carry, I think that might have to be more a part of it. But you're also right now dealing with an offense where, hey, we know Jamar was intermittently available during the offseason, so that's going to be a little bit slower to go as your deep threat there. T. Higgins obviously dealing with the hamstring limits that offense some. And so how they're going to, in the immediacy here, reforge their identity a little bit in this world where teams aren't going to let them have as much downfield is going to be interesting.
Well, I think what concerned all of us who watched that game the most was that it just didn't look like Joe Burrow. But there's so many things that go into it. It brings up questions. Is his wrist okay? Is it fully healthy? Did him getting hurt on the first drive, did him getting hit on the first drive make him see ghosts when he was stepping up in the pocket? And you just go back to the final offensive drive. Those are drives that Joe Burrow made his name in bringing the Bengals back, to win. And the Bengals took it out of his hands. They punted the ball, on fourth down instead of saying, hey, go lead us to victory. It was just a very bizarre game for so much buildup because, Joe Burrow said, this is the most weapons I've ever had in my career here at Cincinnati with some of their new pieces. And he didn't even attempt to push the ball down the field past like 26 yards, I think. So it was just a weird game. But instead of silencing any questions, the Bengals just brought up plenty of more questions about what they're going to be this year. So we will see, because Joe Burrow talked to the media today and he gave us the whole, I got to watch the tape after the game. So we'll see what the tape told him. But people are going to keep asking, is his wrist okay, until he can show that it is okay. So we will see with that. So let's talk about Sunday's game, the CBS primetime 4 p.m. game. These teams have played each other so many times in the last 3 years. Based off what you saw from the Chiefs-Ravens on that Thursday night game and what you saw from the Bengals, what do you think are the main things you're interested to watch in this specific meeting between the Chiefs and the Bengals?
Yeah, I think, we touched on it a little bit before, but how the Bengals defend the middle of the field against the Chiefs. Not only is it Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelsey, who we've seen have such a well-worn relationship, rewriting all the record books there in Kansas City, but we saw Rashee Rice. They got him a bunch of matchup with linebackers and safeties in the middle of the field. He was able to get a bunch of yards after the catch. You've got that speed threat back in their offense with Xavier Worthy to worry about now. I think defensively for the Bengals, that's going to be right after stopping the run and proving you can do that against the Chiefs team that is certainly committed to it. On the other side, I'll be interested to see, like, Trey Hendrickson still balling last week, like did a great job getting after the quarterback. And you're going to have a rookie left tackle for him in Kansas City. That's the one thing we look at that offense and say, hey, we've seen they've had to work around tackle play in the past. Donovan Smith wasn't perfect last year. When he went down, we also saw them dealing with a backup left tackle. That they had to find ways to help out with the scheme, which they're capable of, but you're taking away resources from the pass game then. So can Trey, who is the one part of that defense I think you can still really count on, come into this and be as effective getting after the quarterback in an advantageous matchup for him? Because on the other side, we saw the way Chris Jones wrecked the Baltimore Ravens game plan almost by himself against that offensive line with some of their young new parts.
Chris Jones is as advertised. Every time I go to Arrowhead, I walk away being like, yeah, that guy's really, really good. Offensively for the Bengals, where do you see them having the advantage in attacking Steve Spagnuolo's defense?
I mean, not many places, unfortunately, at this point. I think for them, committing to the run and trying to exploit that. And then in the secondary, you need Jamar and Joe. I mean, if you're talking about taking the top off of defense, that's the Jamar Chase solution. Like, he is their answer to that. You and I talked about this on our show. He's the deep passing game for them by and large. And so I think you're going to have to get back to that point where all that time under task, even if they didn't get it as much as they wanted to this offseason, comes to play for them. And when Spags inevitably wants to send the house, if he chooses and opts to do that in this game, if you get some one-on-one matchups out of there, that's when Joe and Jamar have to be ready to try and do that, so the Chiefs defense has something to think about downfield. Because right now, the way offenses are playing in the NFL, it makes it real easy for defenses to pin their ears back, get upfield, and try and raise hell when you don't have to worry about that threat of downfield passing attack nearly as much.
Well, last one for me, since you have this knowledge. As a former offensive lineman, what do you do to try and help your offensive line out when you got to play against a guy like Chris Jones?
Yeah, I think there's a few things you can do there. Obviously, one, it's just being aware of where he is before every snap. Chris is a guy that they move all around that defensive front. We saw that last week, even right before the snap. He's walking and pointing to the poor guy that he's about to go there and has life he's about to ruin. And so it's having an understanding of where he is on each and every play. You can, put tight ends when he's out on the perimeter, put tight ends there to try and lengthen the edge a little bit and give your tackle some chances there. When he's on the interior, make sure the center's sliding that way. Try and force double teams going in his directions. Present him a lot of different options. Send running back chips through his gap. Make sure that he has got to worry about somebody else in his periphery. You almost have to treat him the way you do a dynamic edge rusher out there. And it's even more paramount because up the middle, we know, especially with, a quarterback like Joe, who is pretty fleet of foot, but any quarterback pressure up the middle is always the ultimate kryptonite. And so I think it's just having almost two sets of eyes on him on every snap out there, because he's the one player on that defensive front. And George Karlaftis has turned into a really good player for them, but it's still all built off the back of the attention that Chris Jones draws, but it's rightly and richly deserved. You got to start to play with two sets of eyes and probably two sets of hands on him too.
Yeah, and if there's any team that knows about really good edge rushers or really good interior play, it's the Bengals, having to play against TJ Watt, Myles Garrett twice a year. Now, it seems like they play the Chiefs twice a year, so you might as well put them in the same division. So there are plenty of awesome storylines heading into this game. So thank you so much for joining me and coming on and talking a little bit about this game. And if I have a feeling, we will be talking soon based off of all of the interesting things going on with the Cincinnati Bengals this year.
Fingers crossed that both the teams that we cover and root for have a lot better time this weekend. Thanks for having me, Kelsey.
Thanks.
Thanks so much to Mike for joining me. So much good stuff from him. And this game, every time the Bengals play the Chiefs, it feels like it's a massive game. But based off of what we didn't see from the Bengals in week one, it almost feels like this game is even more important against the Chiefs, because if the Bengals can go out there and put up 30 points on offense and look like they're clicking on all cylinders and beat the Chiefs in Arrowhead, you will be able to basically erase the week one performance and just chalk it up to the Bengals just aren't a good team in week one. They just take time to get ready and get themselves in game mode, no matter what Zach Taylor tries to do during the preseason, because they did try different things this year. They had 2 joint practices against teams. They tried to give Burrow as many reps as they could while still protecting him. So if the offense can go out and play well against Kansas City and win, that makes that week one loss not as bad. Yes, it was a bad loss. There's no denying it. But you go out and you play well against Kansas City, that could do a lot for the confidence in the locker room and just the morale around this team. It was a defeated locker room on Sunday. You could tell a lot of people were frustrated because I don't think anyone saw that performance coming. So the Bengals have a lot of work to do to get this right. And it's not going to be easy, because the Chiefs beat the Ravens and looked like a well-oiled machine on that season opener Thursday night game last week. So it'll take the Bengals' best effort, and it will take Joe Burrow's best effort against this Kansas City team. He needs to play well. The Bengals gave him a big-time contract for games like this to show that he can go toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes and beat him and really just ignite this franchise. And so he needs to play well against the Chiefs. There's a lot riding on that, because if he doesn't and he's not able to show his arm and wrist strength like he needs to, there's just going to be more questions about what this offense can be and what is the status of Joe Burrow's wrist. So plenty of more storylines to talk about with the Chiefs, and we will cover it all this week on Cincinnati.com. So be sure to keep it right there. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you guys next week.